Okay, so we just completed our very first single crop analysis. Now let's do a multiple crop analysis. So we want to reset our scenario, so if we just go back, select the CropARM option from the very top, and we go back to our landing page, click Getting Started. Again, we're selecting the demo site, okay, and we worked with the 240mm verticile soil that's available for selection there, and we're going to run with wheat again. So if you remember what our first scenario was, and you've got it written down, if you don't recall, it was the 25 kilos of initial soil nitrogen, 60% full of water. Jans is our cultivar. We sowed it on the 30th of May at 100 plants per metre squared with 100 kilos of nitrogen of fertiliser at planting. Okay, so that's our original scenario. So now we might want to look at some other options, like maybe reducing our fertiliser rate. Okay, so say we want to look at maybe putting on some less fertiliser and what the impacts that has on yield or our yield potential. And keeping with that theme, maybe we also want to reduce our sowing rate and save a bit of money on seed, so we can select half the plant density, the target plant density, and see what the impacts of that is. So select those two options, okay, and now we can note down these options in our workbook. So just to get what those options are, click on Add Scenario, and here's our table of options. So again, just scroll across, noting down what our new options are. So our first one here, well, the very first one we've already got noted down because it's our first option we wrote down. Our second option is pretty much the same, but we have changed our fertiliser rate. So we kept the same plant density. Our second option, oh no, my mistake. We have our plant density reduced, but the same fertiliser rate. And the third option is with the original plant density but reduced fertiliser. And then the fourth option is reduced fertiliser and reduced plant density. And so in your workbook, you don't need to note down all the options, but just make sure you note down what you changed between the standard practice and the various other options. Okay, now if you hit Submit, we get our box and whisker plots again, but this time we've got 4 of them because we've got 4 different scenarios being analysed. Okay, so how do we make sense of this? Well, remember, the black line is our median value, the top whisker is our really good yields, our bottom whisker is our poorer yields. Okay, and what we can see here, and this is quite interesting, is that actually reducing our sowing rates seems to have increased our potential yield a little bit. We see the top of the box has increased. Our top whisker has increased a little bit, even our bottom whisker has increased a little bit, and our median certainly has increased. So looks like actually reducing our sowing density in this particular scenario, and remember this is with an initial water content of 60%, so our soil water profile is not completely full, we've actually increased yield. And that might seem a bit weird, pulling back sowing rates but increasing yield. But this may very well be to do with a increase or a reduction in inter-plant competition. So less competition between plants because we've got less plants present, enables them to better utilise the resources and get through to grain field, possibly with not experiencing as much moisture stress at grain field. Okay, option 3 and option 4, note down in our table, that's our reduced fertiliser rate. Okay, so reducing our fertiliser rates doesn't have the same impact as reducing our plant density. It actually has quite a significant negative impact on our yield from our original option, original planting scenario, which was our plant density of 100 kilos and a sowing nitrogen of 100 kilos as well. So we can, just through that simple analysis, we can see that maybe thinking about options, maybe thinking about reducing our sowing rates in this particular case, and I will stress this is particular to this particular scenario, this particular location, you should do the analysis for your own conditions, your own location, but at least in this particular case, a reduction in this planting rate has actually had a net positive improvement on yield. Okay, so just while we're here, before we jump into the gross margin analysis, just note down what our yield results are for each of these each of these plots in your workbook. So just hover over that as I enter mine in. Do option 3. Okay, so again, you will have a result that looks a bit, you'll have entered these numbers into the yield results in your workbook. Okay, let's look at the gross margin analysis as well. So again, we'll click on gross margin. Again, you can change these values if you so want to. You can actually change them for each scenario as well if you really want to. But there's probably no reason why we would change seed costs if we're reducing our plant density, or our fertiliser costs applied if we're just reducing our fertiliser application rates. Then maybe in a particular case, in your particular case, that may change, but at least for the purpose of this exercise, let's leave them all the same. So click copy all values copy values to all scenarios. That sends these values to, or make sure all the values are standardised across our scenarios, and then hit apply. Okay, and we can see there what our gross margin results are. So there might be a case that maybe or you sometimes hear that reducing fertiliser costs helps save money because it's less money out front. However, at least in this scenario, we still have that loss of or that saving in fertiliser costs has not been made up by, the loss of yield and yield revenue in our low fertiliser scenarios has not been made up by the saving in fertiliser cost. In fact, it's made the situation is quite poor compared to our higher fertiliser scenarios. You'll also notice that compared to the yield result for our reduced plant density scenario, the benefits when we look at the gross margin are even greater, because not only have we, by reducing the plant density, we've saved on seed, but we've also gained a yield gain out of it. So it's a double benefit in this case. So again, just note down what these what the results are from each box and whisker plot in your workbooks, so we can then we can reflect on these values. Okay, and your workbook will look something like this now. Okay, so next part of this is to reflect on what we've just learnt out of this activity, and this is really important when using any decision support tool or scenario analysis tool, is to actually sit back and just take a moment to reflect on what this means in terms of your current practice, what you might change, what are maybe some new tactics you might try in your cropping program based on these results. So your workbooks actually have a little space there following the page where we've noted down the analysis results. So you just to note down some thoughts. By all means, these are just your thoughts, so just note down what your conclusions are from this analysis here and what you might think of doing differently. Okay, once you've done that, I would encourage you to now do a scenario for your particular location and a particular crop of your interest. Please make sure you do it in a structured way. So think about a baseline scenario, that's what we did first in the first video, and then some alternative options, which is what we've just done now in this second video here. Make sure you note down what you've done, particularly when you're doing lots of options. It can be quite sometimes hard to remember what each option is. So that's why we've structured that workbook in this way, so you can note them down, what these results are, and then you can reflect back on the yield and your gross margin results to work out what might be appropriate strategies for your particular scenario in your particular farming practice. Okay, we'll leave this video here. Our next video will get into some of the other analysis options that we have in the CropARM tool.